Last night, by a one-vote margin, 214 to 213, the House of Representatives approved a motion to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas on two different impeachment counts: willful and systematic refusal to comply with the law and breach of public trust. We also know the Republicans who did not vote to impeach were Ken Buck from Colorado, Tom McClintock of California, Mike Gallagher joined 210. He actually voted no as well. 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans did not vote. So what happens next? Well, this is interesting because it's not a presidential impeachment, which has a lot more structure in place about who oversees it, the timeline. For instance, we know the managers at the House are going to argue the case, but we also know it's not going to happen anytime before February 25th, before the Senate gets some of its other business done. It looks like the Senate pro tem, who is a Democrat, would be the Chief Justice in that situation. But there's also an ability, Dad, which wasn't really an issue so much because of the Republican majority when we did the first impeachment trial. But when you've got a Democratic, even slim majority, there you can actually do a motion to dismiss on a majority vote. Don't need a supermajority.
Right. Under the rules of the Senate for an impeachment, actually a motion to dismiss like you would file in court, where you move before the trial to dismiss the 2 articles of impeachment, and it's by, as you said, just a majority vote. So if 51 senators say yes, it is, in fact, an impeachment. I'm trying to figure out if it's 50-50, if it was that kind of situation, Sinema going with the Republicans, let's say, does the vice president, who's the president of the Senate, does she then have the right to be a tiebreaker? I think we're looking at that now. I don't know if we have an answer to that because obviously there hasn't been an impeachment of a cabinet member in 158 years. But remember what the articles of impeachment are over. And I think that's important for people to understand. But the trial itself would take place in the United States Senate. They do the walking it over like they normally do. But again, a lot could change in the next 2 weeks as this thing progresses.
Not a guarantee yet that this will get tried in the Senate. But if it does get tried in the Senate, listen, I think you can count the votes. It's unlikely he would be convicted. But what it would give the opportunity to do...
That's the 2/3 rule. That would still take 2/3 of the Senate. Not going to happen.
But what it would give the opportunity to do for these House managers is present the case to the American people. I think that's who the audience actually becomes.
He's been impeached. Now, all that means is the process has been set up. So the House does the impeachment. The trial of the impeachment goes on in the Senate. I think there's a significant likelihood that the majority leader, Chuck Schumer from New York, Senator Schumer, will move, if he has the votes, for a motion to dismiss before any evidence is presented. It's a motion that, like you would file in a court before you start a trial. And if they get 51, all it takes is a simple majority. And if he gets that, it's over with.
Do you bear responsibility for what is happening at the border, what the president himself has called a crisis?
It certainly is a crisis, and we don't bear responsibility for a broken system, and we're doing a tremendous amount within that broken system. But fundamentally, Congress is the only one who can fix it.
Fundamentally, the president has executive authority through executive orders, which this president, no president's failed to utilize. He could have also not reversed some of the Trump policies that would have prevented these massive surges. He did on day one. That was part of what he went in on. So Mayorkas' answer there's not technically even legally correct.
Kamala Harris could come in and be the 51st vote to take this over the line for the motion to dismiss. That's not guaranteed yet because they right now we haven't gone through we don't have all the rules set up for this style of impeachment. It hasn't happened in 150 years.
Yeah, so it's different than a presidential impeachment, which is chaired by the presiding officers of the Chief Justice of the United States. There's been 4 impeachments in our U.S. history of presidents, 2 on President Trump. 2 other presidents have been going through impeachment proceedings. But this is different. And I think that I think you have to have a reality here of what is likely to happen. So, look, the border crisis is significant. ACLJ Action, by the way, our team did a great job of getting, I think, was it 7,200 letters to Capitol Hill urging that this happens. And the problem you have is Mayorkas goes up there. Remember, he wasn't even acknowledging it was a significant crisis until really forced to do it. And of course, he's taken his lead, a lot of it from the administration. So that's a lot of what's going on here. But I think we have to be clear what's at stake. The House got this through, but Jordan, we got to look at this by a 1-vote margin. To get a conviction in the Senate, the founding fathers said it would take 2/3 of a vote to impeach. That is not like, I don't see any way in which that happens. But the reason it was important for the House to do it was to get on record that this border crisis is a crisis, and the Homeland Security Director, who's in charge of all of this, is not taking the necessary steps to protect the country. And it's malfeasance as a form of high crime or misdemeanor. But as Gerald Ford said, high crime and misdemeanors, whatever the majority of Congress says it is.
I don't think there will be any action there until after February 25th. We'll have a set of rules done. Those rules may allow for a motion to dismiss, which only requires a majority vote. I think that Schumer would want to do that if he thinks he's got at least 50, because it does look like Harris, as vice president, could come in as president of the Senate to make that tie-breaking vote if it's seen as procedural. Some of that will come down to the questions they have to present to the parliamentarian before we get answers exactly on that. So no guarantee yet that there will be a trial in the Senate. But if there is, I think, the American people, it could be very beneficial to the American people to see why this impeachment was done. It was done because of the serious crisis that's not just the people coming across the border, but the Americans being killed because of the drugs coming across the border, the human trafficking, the crime, the cities being overrun, institutions being overrun. The list goes on.
The impeachment process is there for something. It's a uniquely political process. So Mayorkas has been impeached. He will not be convicted at the United States Senate, which takes 2/3. Listen, this is when you have elections. I always say elections, CC, have consequences.
Absolutely. They have consequences. And we've seen here that the Republicans have made it known that he's done a bad job. And, whether it goes through or not, at least it's been a public statement that he's done a very bad job.
Yeah, here's the problem, okay? The Republicans won this impeachment by a vote. Literally, 214 to 213. If somebody had the flu that day, it wouldn't have happened again.
They had a little bit of hiccup last week because of, again, you had the majority leader. Yeah, so he was getting treatment, wasn't able to make it back in time. And Al Green was able to come from the hospital to vote. So some hijinks there. But at the end of the day, when the vote was taken, even with losing a couple Republicans, and by the way, we're now down because of the race last night in New York, that special election that Republicans lost by just 10 points in that former seat held by Republican Santos, which will have another election in November.
Yep.
That means we are down to a two vote
down
majority in the House of Representatives. When you get these tight margins, listen, you're not going to get a lot of super conservative legislation through the House. That's not because of Mike Johnson. That's because just the numbers. You're losing Republicans even on impeaching Mayorkas. So, and then in the Senate, you're already down 2.